It's time to break down this Vanity Fair piece. This is a huge, huge article with lots of nonsense in it. Let's go through it a little more closely. Inside Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's big business ambitions 5 years after their royal exit. Now, Vanity Fair, when I first saw this, I was like, I don't know, because Vanity Fair sometimes I don't agree with them on their red carpet best dressed. I think that sometimes they're a little bit pay to play. So when I first saw the cover of this, I was like, this isn't going to be good. And because the timing of it would be to release when Meghan's Netflix show was planning to be released. This was going to coincide with it. So at first I thought that this was just another puff piece interview. But no, it most certainly is not. It's essentially a loose summary of everything that has happened since they landed in Los Angeles, with a bit of a critical tone, and perhaps more importantly, reveals and backs up a lot of the other press and stories that have come out supporting employees. Now, this is something that I think is really important. Harry and Meghan and a lot of people who talk in the media and whatnot talk a lot about supporting employees, supporting people who are coming forth and saying, hey, this is what my experience was and it was really bad, and this is what Harry and Meghan were doing and how difficult they are and how challenging this experience has been. Believing them and standing up for them and making sure that they are not bulldozed by people who have millions of dollars and big names like Harry and Meghan do. Notorious names, but big names nonetheless. But yet, consistently, Harry and Meghan have tried to squash these people's experience and call them liars, basically, ever since they were with the royal family, which is contradictory to their supposed morals. And so I think that in some ways, a lot of these articles have continued to come out talking with insiders to validate and back up these people. And that was part of the problem that we ran into with the royal family's staff that left Harry and Meghan's team or quit or couldn't deal with Harry and Meghan. They kept that bullying report private, in part probably to protect those people from harassment from Sussex fans that are just sometimes a little crazy and not very realistic. Isn't that right? Even just this subtitle here reveals the tone of this article, and for it to, if when you theorize how it would have been received coming out at the same time as her Netflix show, it would have really, really not been a good look to have some of the only press circulating around the time of the Netflix show premiering would have been this. Ensconced in their cozy Montecito mansion, the Sussexes are living the American dream. By all accounts, the love is real, but their foray into moguldom has not always been a smooth ride, to say the least. And I don't know that I would say they're living the American dream whatsoever. That is generally seen as, it's, I suppose, subjective, but it's generally seen as making something of yourself for yourself. Bootstraps pulling up sort of a vibe. Harry and Meghan haven't done anything for themselves. Meghan married into the fame and fortune that she now enjoys. She didn't make any of this happen for herself, and therefore, I would not call it the American dream. Harry doesn't even know what that means. So it starts by talking about their mansion, their home, just a bit. And I found this interesting. There was a rumor when they first went to Canada before staying at Tyler Perry's place that they were staying at this Russian oligarch's house that was kind of a controversial figure, and it was kept under wraps just whose house they were staying at. And here, apparently, the previous owner of Harry and Meghan's home was owned by some oligarch. Here it says, the oligarch owner's romantic relationship had deteriorated to the point where he was compelled to offload far below market value, according to a source with knowledge, and the property seemed just right for the Duke and Duchess. It was the perfect launch pad for Archewell, and so they bought it at less than or about half the price it normally would have sold for. And I find this interesting because mayhaps whoever it was they were staying with in Canada was also the owner of this place and willing to sell it to them for that low price. Who knows? This year marks 5 years since the Sandringham Summit, and evidently Vanity Fair thought it would be a good time to recap. Over many months, Vanity Fair spoke with dozens of people who have worked with and lived alongside the couple to understand the impact they've had on their new coastal California home. Harry still works closely with the charities he founded, like Invictus Games Foundation and Sendabale, an organization focusing on mental fitness and the impact of poverty and HIV/AIDS in southern African countries. He has real gravitas when he speaks about his work in Africa, says someone inside the couple's circle, and he is free from Willie, as well as the future king's supposed dominion over that continent, as Harry confessed in his 2023 memoir, Spare. Africa was his thing, Harry said. And that just makes Harry seem like an immature, petulant little child. You cannot share an entire continent with people, Harry. What the heck is wrong with you? That's silly. Just ridiculous. More of Harry's ridiculous viewpoints on things that, oh, well, I'm the only one who's doing Africa charities. It's stupid. Super stupid. Archwell also encompasses Meghan's efforts to empower and educate young women, like the 40 by 40 initiative, where for her 40th birthday, she asked 40 well-known friends to spend 40 minutes on Zoom mentoring a woman returning to the workplace in the wake of the pandemic. That was failed. Super terrible venture that she started. There was questions if she even knew 40 friends or if she just asked 40 random people, but it just disappeared. Nobody actually did it. And also, 40 minutes on Zoom mentoring someone isn't really going to help them. What can these people actually offer someone entering the workplace in 40 minutes? Almost nothing. That was a dumb idea. Just telling people about your experience, which will be completely different and far removed from that of somebody re-entering a workplace, is not going to be helpful. The audacity. On March 14th of last year, the 4th anniversary of their flight to California, Meghan rejoined Instagram to announce American Riviera Orchard, a home goods and sundries line. The Sussexes have announced Meghan's second podcast, though not the title or premise of it. Archwell Productions also recently produced 2 high-profile Netflix series, a docuseries called Polo, which premiered December 10 and was panned by everybody and had really terrible viewership, and the reality show With Love, Meghan. The latter is a hospitality endeavor that, according to the Netflix promotional language, reimagines the genre of lifestyle programming, blending the practical how-tos and candid conversations with friends new and old. Something nobody wants. Along with this little list, we have a lot of other failed ventures, like how she tried to write The Bench, which sucked. I have a video on that. I'll link it for you. And we've had no other information about any upcoming podcasts, and Lemonada still isn't, I don't think, showing or letting people listen to our archetypes even. I don't think. If it is, fine, maybe, but nobody's listening to it. That's for sure. This paragraph alone just shows and reminds people of the chaotic vibe that Meghan has taken to finding something to do with herself, and the sort of lack of drive that she has, where she can't really execute any of these things and hasn't found anything to be successful. Neither has Archwell Productions or Harry. 3 days before her show's scheduled premiere date of January 15, she announced the series would be pushed back to March 4. The couple has been volunteering amid the crisis, a very loose use of the term. They have this naivete and their hopefulness about what's possible in terms of storytelling and good works and all those things, says producer Jane Marie, who collaborated with the couple while they developed audio projects at Archwell and later produced a podcast with Michelle Obama. I wish I had that kind of optimism. Optimism abounded as the couple embarked on their Spotify deal in 2020. Both for them and for those who were coming in to help do the work. I thought I had the role of a lifetime, says a person who worked in media projects, who was a fan going in and eager to make the type of life-changing content Harry and Meghan seemed to want to create. I thought I was going to be besties with Meghan and Harry, and we were going to run around the world saving people. Yeah, that is the image that Harry and Meghan want to push onto people. But if you look just beyond the things that they say, you see none of that actually ever happens and is not true in the slightest. But that also serves to illustrate the exact vibe that was going about at the time. Harry and Meghan talked big games and were big names, and they were throwing big tantrums. And so they were getting a lot of attention, and they were afforded opportunities that they did not deserve. Interest in the couple was unslackable, but it remained to be seen whether they were actually interesting. They're not. They're very boring and have no good sense of humor. Beyond Harry's uniquely difficult upbringing, was it difficult? Or was it unique? And Meghan's years of defending herself from shoddy treatment and isms, whether in the British press or from members of her husband's family, again, not accurate, and also not a good thing to put in this article because of the inaccuracies. Harry and Meghan themselves, lest us need to remind Vanity Fair, have said they weren't calling anyone in the royal family racist. JK, they told Tom Bradby. As one former Spotify employee put it, the thing you're escaping is the reason you're compelling, which only serves to prove that Harry and Meghan themselves are not interesting. The media was caught up in the idea, and the public to some degree was caught up in the idea that there could be this scandal that the royal family or the institution in general isn't as virtuous as they should be or seem to be. Are they? Is there isms floating about? That would have been juicy, shocking, scandalous, a big deal. But it just wasn't. It wasn't the case. And several years later, Harry himself confirmed that's not the case. These stories would be meted out in different media. Breathless reports of a $20 million Penguin Random House contract for Spare the Bench, which Vanity Fair has completely forgotten the Meg wrote The Bench, and a $100 million partnership with Netflix for Harry and Meghan and these other Netflix shows. According to a representative for Netflix, they do not disclose their financial deals with talent, but can confirm to you on the record that the $100 million figure is not correct, which is what most people thought. The $100 million and $20 million would maybe be a ceiling of like, you can earn up to this amount if you produce this maximum amount of content that performs to the top of the charts consistently for a number of weeks at a time. The actual numbers would be much, much, much lower. On the August 2022 cover of The Cut, Meghan did promote her first and only Spotify podcast, Archetypes, as well as herself. Then they discussed the Cut piece, which I have covered extensively. I will link to you the playlist and the videos for The Cut specifically, because it was sus. One of the people who spoke with Vanity Fair for this story says they signed a non-disclosure agreement to be employed by Harry and Meghan. A person who worked closely with the couple and loves them says they have no idea what Harry's interests are beyond polo. No clue what his inner life is like, which would make sense if you're working for someone. If they are your boss, you shouldn't know more about them, really, to an extent. If they are actually being professional, you shouldn't be knowing a ton of their hobbies and personal things, because it should be a professional environment. The development process for Spotify was challenging. The former Spotify employee says they had this idea to do a podcast because they knew celebrities did them. Basically like, well, that's what they do, so that's what we'll do, rather than understanding what their actual talents are, just more cherry picking of and copying of other people's characteristics, much like Meghan has been doing for forever now. A category differentiated between celebrities who get a lot of money to begin podcasting, like Harry and Meghan, and celebrities who get large deals after proving themselves to be capable podcasters, like Will Arnett, Sean Hayes, and Jason Bateman with Smartless podcast, or countless other examples too. The former Spotify employee says Harry and Meghan didn't do what celebrities do on podcasts, which is just turn on the mic and talk. They wanted a big theme that would explain the world, but they had no ideas. Someone who worked closely with them on audio projects disputes this version, lamenting that because of Meghan and Harry's insistence on silence from employees and their own reticence, the public doesn't know about good projects that had to be abandoned for practical reasons. It feels like the only story is they didn't satisfy their contract. It's not like work wasn't being done. She misses the point. If they didn't satisfy their contract, not enough and not enough quality work was being done. The quality wasn't there, the substance wasn't there, or the work wasn't there, it doesn't really matter. If you don't show up to work or you show up and don't get the work done, it's the same thing. You will be fired. And that is what happened. They recap that it took about 2 years, even just for Archetypes to premiere, and Spotify was pressuring them to produce anything else that people might listen to. People involved with the production say the couple did trial runs on some big ideas, like this American Lifestyle show where Harry and Meghan took turns hosting and talking to interesting civilian guests. As Bloomberg reported, Harry wanted to host a series where he interviewed powerful men with complicated stories, and people who worked with them confirmed there was a sociopath podcast. Harry said, "I have very bad childhood trauma. Obviously, my mother was essentially murdered." False. She was not wearing her seatbelt and had a driver who was drunk. The man had alcohol in his system and was speeding. And Princess Diana did not have on her seatbelt. Countless examinations of this case have proven time and time again, if Princess Diana had worn her seatbelt like she should have known to do, she would not have died. So to say that she was essentially murdered is insane and misinformation. Regardless, this is what Harry says. This is his quote, so it's fine. Well, not fine, but it is what it is. He says, "What is it about me that didn't make me one of these bad guys?" Basically saying that he wanted to interview people he thought from the outside were sociopaths, but claiming he was not a sociopath. I would argue in many ways Harry exhibits signs of sociopathy because he disregards other people's privacy and well-being to his own benefit with such ease and lies consistently, and he is extremely hypocritical. I would say he's not a bad guy. I'd say Harry is a pretty bad guy. A former Spotify employee says Harry came to the Los Angeles office once and asked for a cup of hot cocoa, and there was none, so they had to scramble to obtain some, and because of this, an idea was pitched to Harry. What if he reviewed a hot chocolate every week while chatting with a different friend? Which his team considered and rejected. Obviously, what a stupid idea. And also, who is this 40-year-old man asking for hot cocoa in the middle of the day at a professional meeting? What? Another concept was that Harry would fix something every week, ranging from a flat tire to global warming. Who would care to see that? Harry hasn't fixed anything, ever. He wanted to do a podcast about disabled people who compete in the Invictus Games, but there's no crossover between the audience who would listen to that and the people who want to hear about Harry's life. Perhaps that's the error. People don't really want to hear about Harry's life because he only complains and acts like it was so hard. He never mentions the positive, and this is something that I have said about Harry and Meghan for a long time. In all the talking they have ever done, not once have they reported any positive feedback. They haven't even said that they felt privileged to get to meet and experience all these different people from different cultures and interact with them. Like when they did the Australia, New Zealand tour, when they did the South Africa tour, when they were just going around the UK and they went to Ireland. They have never come out and said that that was a privilege or a positive, getting to travel to see these amazing, beautiful places. But Harry and Meghan had the opportunity to do so much of that, and not once have they listed that as a positive. Not once have they said they at least liked getting to work with these charities or make some positive impact. Not once have they issued out any positives. They're giving no rope to the positives, and Harry never lists any positives to his upbringing. He never acknowledges his privilege and the positives, that he did have a lot of family around him when he lost his mother, that he had his brother who was going through the exact same thing as he. Never has Harry acknowledged these things. And so it just shows poor character, you can't respect it, and it just gives us more bad examples about the type of person Harry and Meghan are, and also demonstrates why this whole podcasting thing was so challenging, because it seemed like they were competing between coming up with ideas that were just boring and terrible and nobody's going to want to watch or listen, and things that were self-obsessed. Again, not likable. When the more we learn about Harry and Meghan, the less likable they are. The former Spotify employee says it was challenging to engage Harry, big surprise. And a person who interviewed for a job with the couple says, "I just felt like he kind of didn't want to be there doing that at this time. My expectation was charming receiving line, and it was clear he wasn't that person, at least that day. And at least in the context of a hiring manager, a person who worked on an event during Harry's book tour says he has the greatest manners I've ever seen, hands down. I can't believe his knees are as supple as they are. He was getting up and down anytime somebody walked into a room. He was unfailingly kind and friendly to everyone." The potential employee says during the interview, Harry's attitude was either, well, why should I do this? Or why are we doing this? The interviewee says they wondered, didn't Spotify pay you a lot of money to do this? The person inside the couple's circle says he looks like the kind of guy who would, quite frankly, happily work for charities the rest of his life and would be very happy if Meghan made all the money and he didn't need to. Exactly the impression most people have of him. That his life has been so cushioned that he can't quite make it in the real world. And this is indicative of the very problem with Harry and Meghan, is that people, no matter how toxic, narcissistic, self-serving, horrible they are, still are charming and kind and nice and amiable some of the time. They're still super duper nice to some people some of the time, especially if they're on show. Getting up and down and saying hello to everybody and having good manners is something Harry can turn on when need be. Meghan and Harry can be nice and friendly and kind when need be, when it serves them. So there's no surprise here that some people are having negative experiences and some are having positive experiences. The trouble is in the way Harry and Meghan paint their image and are so holier than thou and pompous in their ways and hypocritical on top of it. And there's never enough substance or truth or authenticity to back any of this up to where they would have allowances for not always being perfect. Then they recap Bill Simmons' comment that they are grifters and were horrible to work with at Spotify. Meghan and Harry became increasingly nervous about how their content would impact them. Marie says, I can say that they had really great ideas for shows, interesting pitches, interesting guests, but them as the deliverers, or either of them as the hosts of these more kind of edgy ideas, would have been like, they would have had to move again. I think it's a combination of self-censorship for good reason and the corporate powers that be that run podcasting that don't know what that is. That he has to protect, and he has the book and they have the documentary and they didn't want to make the Queen upset and their public image. I don't think they thought about it that hard. I think that a lot of the ideas, Harry doesn't want to work that hard and Meghan's not that good at stuff. So ultimately, at the end of the day, even if they wanted to do any of these podcasts, they wouldn't have been able to actually execute. And with things like podcasting or other projects, content production of any kind, it has to be a situation where you have some degree of passion about some element of it. For example, it could be that you don't always like the subject matter, but you do very much so enjoy writing, or you're a very good journalist. And so a podcast that is in some sort of a journalism genre, you would be good at it simply because you're good at and passionate about writing or journalism. And so regardless of the subject matter, you can find success there, and it will come across that way to the audience because there is an element that you're passionate about. Alternatively, say you're very passionate about a specific hobby, like reading, literature, something like that, novels. And so then a podcast reviewing different novels would be successful because your passion for it comes through. That is the big key to content creation of any kind, be it podcasts, journalism and written word and books, or news articles, opinion pieces, essays, op-eds, whatever, or videos, or anything like that. When you're creating content, you have to have an element to it that you're passionate about. The problem with Harry and Meghan is that they were trying to think of things that would be successful. What would be good? What will work? What will get us more fans? What will make us look good? They were focused on that, not finding content that they could actually get excited about themselves. That's why it sucked and why none of it worked, because they weren't suggesting things that they would be excited and passionate about. Therefore, it's lacking that authenticity and it won't be received well, and you won't be inspired to actually do the hard work to do it, which is very common amongst people who have never actually had to work for anything in their lives, like Harry and Meghan. Now, granted, I know Meghan was on a TV show and stuff like that, but allegedly her dad got her the job and she used people around her to get the opportunities that she had. She never really came out of nowhere and built things for herself by herself. That was not Meghan's story. The idea for Archetypes came from a different employee who didn't own any of the intellectual property, so Meghan claimed it as her own work. Not a nice move. The initial expectation was that Archewell would handle the production for the series, but the process took so long that Spotify's studio Gimlet was called in. which required additional cost and resources from Spotify. Although a current Spotify employee refutes the idea that extra support was a burden, but it still had to happen, regardless whether it was burdensome or not. Virtually the entire Gimlet team would be laid off in the year following Archetypes' release, but employees blame mismanagement at Spotify rather than any individual project. The former Spotify source says Archetypes was complicated as a podcast concept, much like The Meg. Just can't let something be simple. You had to explain what the archetype was, why the woman embodied it, but also how it wasn't true about her. Every episode was like, this is my friend who has been called that archetype, but they are not that archetype. And these archetypes actually are stereotypes, which included diva Mariah Carey and bimbo Paris Hilton and Eliza Schlesinger. As for those friends, there was an expectation that Meghan would be able to use her personal Rolodex to book the show, the way hosts like Simmons and Pod Save America guys do. The person who worked in the media project says the assumption was that Meghan's going to be on the phone with the Pope tomorrow. The former Spotify employee says in addition to Taylor Swift, they had heard rumors of Beyonce and Megan Thee Stallion, who were asked to come on the show and declined. Other people who worked on the podcast also say they heard those names mentioned, though a source close to the situation says Megan Thee Stallion's team knew nothing about any such request. And so once again, we have Meghan giving the impression of this, or thinking that she's entitled to everybody just groveling to want to come onto her podcast when they're not. And remember, the Archetypes podcast always circled back to Meghan because she felt she had been called these things. So it sounds like she took the idea from that employee and molded it into something else entirely. But it's not an interesting podcast no matter what. Granted, a lot of the women who could have potentially been guests on this podcast may have been very interesting, dynamic, and had very interesting stories where they did make something of themselves and go through their challenges and solve problems and make something for themselves and build their own success. And inspiring, despite being stereotyped as something negative. They were still part of that network of celebrities and wealthier people who were far removed from what most people deal with. And most people's daily lives, the least of their concern is being called the B word or diva because they have bills to pay and jobs to do and medication to afford and things like that. Meghan also changed the title of an episode from slut to human being, and it had to be completely reimagined late in production because Meghan wasn't comfortable with the content, as well as she wouldn't say the B word, which is just hilarious. And just, she's so outside herself, looking in all of the time. Can't ever just be normal and do something. Every episode got more and more watered down and further away from the actual conversation. It felt like very Women's and Gender Studies 101 taught in 2003, which is exactly, I would say, a good description of this. It all felt, and what I said when I heard it was, it feels outdated. It feels like Meg is talking about things that are no longer issues anymore. And anytime she talks about women's issues, it feels like she's talking about stuff that was problems years ago, not really so much problems now, because she's so far removed from what it's actually like now, today, right now. She doesn't get it. And once again, Spotify clarifies they were not just handed out a $20 million lump sum in the beginning of things, but they do not comment on deal terms. But they did allude to it not being accurate, just like Netflix's reports on the financial deals were not accurate. These issues extended into the actual workplace with Terry Wood, an executive vice president at Oprah Winfrey's Harpo Productions, brought in to be what Meghan would later call her right hand, when Archetypes won a People's Choice Award in 2022. Which it shouldn't have. It seems like that was another pay-to-play moment. The source familiar with the production of Archetypes describes Wood's anger, saying that she yelled at Spotify staffers when Meghan changed her mind about episodes. More toxic workplace comments. The source who worked in media projects says Meghan's own relationships with employees tended to follow a similar pattern. She would be warm and effusive at the beginning, because it serves her, engendering an atmosphere of professional camaraderie because it serves her. When something went poorly, often due to Meghan and Harry's own demands, as we know, such as a teaser for Archetypes being released 5 months before the show premiered and before there was any tape to promote at Meghan's behest, and then that was criticized because, duh, that's not how you run businesses, Meghan. Meghan would become cold and withholding towards the person she perceived to be responsible. This is that communal narcissism right here. This is exactly what they do. If they think you've done something wrong, it's just all of a sudden you're getting the cold shoulder, or it's like you're invisible, or they won't talk to you, or they'll sabotage you in some way, or spread rumors about you because they're mad at you for something that you didn't actually do or isn't actually your fault, or because they just need someone to blame, then you become the scapegoat. The source says it was really, really, really awful, very painful, because she's constantly playing checkers. I'm not even going to say chess, but she's very aware of where everybody is on her board. And when you're not in, you are to be thrown to the wolves at any given moment. And this is that very toxic behavior. The communal narcissist, regular narcissists do this a lot. It's like giving certain employees almost feeling like they have an elevated status, telling them that they're your right-hand man, or you're their eyes and ears, doing nice things for them, like sending them care packages and spoiling them to some ways, showing them special preferential treatment, treating them like the golden child, and then picking out other scapegoats. That is exactly the toxic tactics that these types of people use. One person who worked in the media projects couldn't believe the bullying claims that they had seen in the press, but then once they worked with the Meg, realized that, oh, any given Tuesday this could have happened. While it beggars belief that Meghan actually shouted at a palace aide, it has been reported a person who interacted with her professionally says, "You can be yelled at even if somebody doesn't raise their voice. It's funny that people don't differentiate between the energy of being yelled at and literally someone screaming at you." And this is what I said when the horrible bosses report came out. You can be yelled at without somebody literally like, rah, rah. Like, that's what I think a lot of people imagine. But that's not how it is in the workplace. It can be a curt email. It can be snippy comments. It can be a tone of like, why did you let this happen? This is not acceptable. Or why would you approve this version of the trailer to be released? This is not what I approved. Like, that can count as yelling in the workplace, because that's how it feels. Because you can feel if they weren't restraining themselves, they would be yelling at you. Two sources say a colleague with ties to Archetypes took a leave of absence after working on only 3 episodes. It sounds like the Meg is just the most frustrating person to work with and literally sabotages things, much like toxic people tend to do. Several others described taking extended breaks from work to escape the scrutiny, exiting their job, or undergoing long-term therapy after working with Meghan. The person who interacted professionally with her says, "I think if Meghan acknowledged her own shortcomings or personal contributions to situations rather than staying trapped in a victim narrative, her perception might be better." True. When you take accountability, it's a lot easier. When you take accountability for your own mistakes, or for your not knowing how something goes, or not always being the easiest to work with, or kind of needing to understand a lot of the details in order to see the big picture, or some people can't really quite grasp the big picture, and so they need, a little bit of extra explaining, or a little bit of extra seeing it play out in real time, or things like that to really grasp it. When you're honest with yourself about those things, and you're like, I don't really understand how this works. I know nothing about podcasting. Please help me develop a team that can help teach me how to do this, but I can read a script. The Meg could have taken that approach. When you own and know your faults and your advantages, your strengths and your weaknesses, it's so freeing and so helpful, because then when you make a mistake, it's not attached to the ego. Nobody can be good at everything. So when you know you're not great at technology, when you get something wrong, it doesn't feel like you've done something horrible or you should be super upset, or it doesn't rock your confidence, because you're like, yeah, I know I'm not great at technology. Help me fix this, because I didn't know what I was doing and now I've made an error. Those types of things are so important to acknowledge your shortcomings, to acknowledge where you're at, what you're good at, what you're not, and just be honest about it and just own it. And the Meg seems to not be capable of that at all. We're about halfway through the article here. I'm going to release a part 2 going through the rest of this article. I will see you in it, hopefully tomorrow. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Have a happy day, everybody. I'll see you next time. Bye.